What I just wanted to do is to give you a potted history of how we've got to where we are now and where I believe we need to go to. So going back to 2004, qualified in this approach, the Human Givens approach, and felt that we needed to call for accountability because it wasn't any good to just have anecdotal stories about effectiveness in treatment, although there were plenty of those around. But if we were really to get anywhere, to really be able to impress upon people that this is a very good way of working, we need to collectively demonstrate that in some sort of satisfactory way. I have to say I was incredibly naive at the time. I thought, well, what's the simplest way of doing this? So let's find a very simple outcome measure that's used internationally. We'll gather our data, we'll show that we're effective, and hey presto, we'll go to NICE guidelines and they'll say, well done, clap us on the back and say, welcome aboard. So the journey took me to America and contacting a group called Talking Cure, who were using these very brief measures, which you'll see later on, called the outcome rating scale and the session rating scale. Basically, the outcome rating scale, 4 question measures, 4 lines, you put a mark on the line, really quick to use, very, very helpful. And the session rating scale, the outcome rating scale measuring about progress in treatment, the session rating scale measuring about the interaction between you as the practitioner and the client or service user with you. And I thought, well, great, if we can just start doing this. So I roped in a bunch of willing participants, and about 25 people in the first 12 months between 2005 2006 we started gathering data, and soon enough we had data on 200 or 300 clients, clearly demonstrating on the ORS that this was an effective way of working. And I thought, well, it should be easy enough then. However, life is not that simple, and what one has to realize is we live in particular political climates where the people who are in the position of making decisions have a special sort of language that they use, and they have to have an agreed way of working and understanding, and we need to be able to communicate with them in that way. So that led me to meet John Mellor-Clark from CORE IMS. CORE outcome measure have been used in the UK now since 1999. They were developed at the University of Leeds, and the idea was to develop a naturalistic measure. So what John did is he went out around the country, he spoke to practitioners everywhere of all sorts of different approaches, persuasions, and said, what do you normally ask your clients about when they first come to see you? And he built up a huge list of questions, worked on it, narrowed it all down, and ended up with this 34-question measure. So by 2006, there were 6 years of really robust data having been gathered from lots of services around the country. And so I thought at the time, knowing what I knew at that point, that what would be a next sensible thing to do would be for us Human Givens practitioners to work with gathering CORE data. We decided to adopt CORE, and many practitioners who love the ORS said they would also do the ORS parallel with CORE. So basically these 25 people who had been such great willing participants to get involved with ORS, I then knocked on their door and said, hey guys, hate to tell you this, but we need to do more. We need to measure with CORE as well, because that was a language that the powers that be in the UK understood. So if we had data in CORE, it would mean something to them. The other thing is that because there was 6 years of data gathered using CORE in different services throughout the country, there was something called a CORE National Research Database. So lots of services were contributing their data into the University of Leeds originally, and this data was being amalgamated, and they were able to publish papers saying, well, it looks like X number of clients who start treatment appear to get this type of an outcome, etc. That's why we adopted CORE at that time. Got off to a great start. We did a pilot study in Luton starting in April 2007, running for a year. 3 practitioners, 1 day a week each, at a medical practice in Luton. And that ran for 12 months. Halfway through that 12 months, we then widened it out to involve practitioners all over the country, all using the same system. Using CORE at the beginning of treatment, CORE 34. The original plan was CORE 34 question measure at the first appointment, CORE 10 sessionally all the way through, and CORE 34 at the end of treatment. We got to the end of the first 12 months of Luton, and meanwhile, improving access to psychological therapies was launched. Probably one of the biggest social experiments ever carried out in the country, really. And of course I realized we were in an incredibly fast-moving story, really. What had actually happened was, it had originally looked like CORE was going to be the measure of choice in improving access to psychological therapies, but basically there was a lot of political infighting going on, and the end result was that CORE was actually marginalized, and the Improving Access to Psychological Therapies program decided to use two other measures, one primarily focused on depression, PHQ-9, and one primarily focused on anxiety, GAD-7. And this meant that we had all our data in CORE, but the Improving Access to Psychological Therapies was in GAD-7 and PHQ-9, not directly comparable. This left me with a major problem. What could we do about our Luton data? So the Luton data, the project finished after 12 months. Meanwhile, everybody else was carrying on gathering their data. But I was absolutely stuck, because the published papers on CORE data were from what we call time 1 and time 2. So basically, somebody was measured at the beginning of treatment. If they were still there at the end, they were measured at the end. The problem was, with the data from the database, that less than 40% of the people who were measured at the beginning were measured at the end of treatment. So 60%, 61% in fact, were not there to be measured, or if they were there, they weren't measured. So this National Research Database data was built on a subset of the people who started treatment. Now, think about that in comparison to Luton, where 100% of the people who stayed for more than one appointment, we had a second outcome measure for. So it left me with a real dilemma. How can you make a reasonable comparison between data where you've got 100% inclusive data against only 39%? You see what the problem was?